Yeah. Hello.
Hello everybody. Welcome to today's presentation on REDD+ and the 2030 Sustainable Development Goals, what linkages and lessons learned in the Democratic Republic of Congo. Quickly, the background is, as you might have seen in the email, that Congo in 2009 adopted REDD+ in order to protect the second largest tropical rainforest in the world. Since then, they made valuable REDD+ readiness advancements and defined a set of planned REDD+ activities. Recently, the DRC also started mainstreaming the Sustainable Development Goals, and Florence now looks at potential linkages between REDD+ and the SDGs in the DRC in order to understand whether and how implementation strategies of both can be aligned. She addresses barriers to linkages between the two and formulates recommendations, policy recommendations. Quickly, Florence Bernard, in terms of educational background, holds an MSc in Agronomy and Rural Development, as well as an MSc in Environmental Sciences. She is currently an associate scientist and works on several multi-country, multi-stakeholder development and research projects. She mainly concentrates on questions related to enhancement of sustainable multifunctional landscapes and the REDD+ agenda. Florence has been working with ICRA for the last 8 years and is part of the landscapes governance team. Welcome, Florence.
Thank you, Lisa. Good morning, everyone, and welcome. So just to give you a little bit of background about this study, we carried that study in 2017. It was requested by the FAO Forest Department, and we conducted a detailed review of 3 of policy framework in 3 case study countries: Democratic Republic of the Congo, Indonesia, and Peru. And I conducted specifically the one on DRC that I will present today. And so it was funded by FAO and also by the CCAF program, especially in DRC, to support interviews and the focus group discussion. So because I was not sure how familiar all of you would be with the SDG and REDD+, I'll just give you a little background about both before I get to the core of the presentation. So first, the Sustainable Development Goals. So in 2015, countries around the world reached a global consensus and adopted Agenda 2030 with the goal of advancing the promotion of people, planet, and prosperity. And this Agenda 2030 includes 17 Sustainable Development Goals, SDG, which are underpinned by 169 targets intended to achieve the ambitious agenda of addressing social, environmental, and economic dimension of sustainability in an integrated way. So currently at the moment it's like a central guide which is often looked up as the main global normative framework on environment and development. And they came into effect in January 2016 with the deadline to meet the specific goals and target by 2030. So you can see that, okay, like the main SDG, just to quickly cite them, is SDG 1 is about no poverty. We have the 2 about zero hunger, good health and well-being, quality education, gender equality, clean water and sanitation, affordable and clean energy, decent work and economic growth, industry, innovation and infrastructure, one about reduced inequalities, sustainable cities and communities, responsible consumption and production. SDG 13, which is of course of great importance to us, which is about taking urgent action to combat climate change and its impact. And then we have 14 about life below water, SDG 15 again, which is very important to us, protect, restore, and promote the sustainable use of terrestrial ecosystems. SDG 16 about peace and justice, strong institution. And finally, SDG 17, partnership for the goals. This one is actually also quite important because it's actually supposed to strengthen the means of implementation for all of the other SDG, and especially by promoting integration through appropriate governance processes, arrangement processes for multi-stakeholder engagement and financing mechanism, so that it supports the synergy across all of these other goals. Just to highlight that SDG are not legally binding, but the government are expected to actually take ownership and establish national framework for the achievement of the 17 goals. And the difference between, I'm sure you're aware that before SDG we had the Millennium Development Goals, and let's say the difference is that SDG also gives a greater attention to the environmental issues, and it actually raised a collective international ambition to conserve forests. And obviously this ambition is highly significant for the UNFCCC, United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change, and in particular to REDD+. So coming to REDD+, and give you as well a little bit of background. So it's a mechanism that is going to provide positive incentives, such as payment, to developing countries, so that they contribute to climate change mitigation through conservation and restoration activities in the forestry and land use sectors. And the specificity of REDD+ mechanism is that payments are linked to performance. And you have 5 eligible REDD+ activities. That's actually what REDD+, the acronym, stands for. So first, reducing emission from deforestation, reducing emission from forest degradation, and the plus that was added covers the 3 last one: conservation of forest carbon stocks, sustainable management of forest, and enhancement of forest carbon stocks. REDD+ REDD+ has been a long process that started in 2005 in COP11 in Montreal, where REDD was added to the UNFCCC agenda. And going up to actually COP21 in Paris in 2015, where finally, like, REDD+ was actually explicitly endorsed in the Paris Agreement. In between, we had some important aspects, such as safeguards that have been developed for REDD+. There have been 7 safeguards developed so that when you implement some REDD+ activity, you should, for instance, respect the knowledge and right of indigenous people, ensure the full and effective participation of all stakeholders, and also have some action to address the risk of reversal or reducing displacement of emission. There are different safeguards. And then in Warsaw, in 2013, they also give some 4 key elements that any country should have at least, so that they can access to the payment, the result-based payments, which is a national strategy or action plan that is going to describe all of the action to take to reduce the emission, a national forest monitoring systems, so that there is capacity to monitor the forest area change and produce national forest inventories, the safeguard and safeguard information system, which is related to what I was talking about, and finally, forest reference emission levels or forest reference levels, which are benchmarked for assessing the performance of each country in mitigating the climate change through the REDD+ implementation. So there are actually some significant and potentially mutually supportive linkages among the goals of REDD+ and Agenda 2030. So FAO thought that it was actually a timely and critical opportunity to review those policy frameworks to ensure more cross-sectoral coordination and coherent and inclusive outcomes. And obviously, like, so I've shown you what is REDD+ about and the different SDG, and easily we get a sense that REDD+ would be mostly closely related to SDG 15 on the life on land and SDG 13 on climate change. But REDD+ can also deliver a lot of non-carbon benefit or co-benefit, such as local socio-economic development and improvement in governance. So therefore, it could also actually contribute to many more SDG and hence the goal of the study as well. So the key question for that study, and specifically focusing on the case study of DRC, is first, how does DRC REDD+ process contribute to the achievement of SDG in DRC? What are the barriers to REDD+ and SDG linkages in DRC? And finally, what are the key policy recommendations to support coherent and inclusive linkages between those two REDD+ and SDG goals in DRC? So we developed an analytical framework that would guide to review coherence and complementary of those policy and governance elements relevant for effective REDD+ implementation and with alignment with the SDG, and that guided the analysis for the 3 case study countries, Peru, Indonesia, and DRC. We first looked at the country setting in terms of the background on forest and specifically at what were the main drivers of deforestation and forest degradation. Then we looked at for each country at what SDG they prioritized in their own country and what were the details of the REDD+ readiness process in their country. Then in terms of the policy interlinkages, this is where we looked at how REDD+ could actually contribute to prioritize the SDG. We looked at the interlinkages across governance levels, so meaning in terms of the coordination mechanism in place at national and subnational levels within those 2 processes. The coordination mechanism as well that are going to support interministerial or interagency collaboration. And finally, whether there was a set of common elements to monitor the approaches that could be used for the SD forest related goals and monitoring of REDD+ action. Finally, for the enabling environment, we also looked whether there were clarity around the institutional mandates and the frameworks, whether there were potential synergies in financial and operational resources and mechanisms, and also what were the mechanisms in place to promote multi-stakeholder involvement, and whether the stakeholders involved in REDD+ were also involved in the SDG processes and vice versa. So in terms of the methodology, we conducted a detailed review of all the available grey literature, policies, strategies, national report and synthesis, also some peer-reviewed scientific literature. We conducted a couple of interviews with the key relevant stakeholders, and also we had a half-day validation workshop in Kinshasa that were also attended by different stakeholders working in this domain and from different ministries and NGOs, even from the private sector. So, in terms of the background on DRC forest, so DRC has the world's second largest tropical rainforest, which accounts for nearly 2/3 of the Congo Basin forest area, and actually approximately 10% of the humid tropical forest of the planet. So it currently has 152.5 million hectares in 2015. That represents 67.3% of the country's total land area. And 69% of this forest block is actually dense humid forest, which is very important for the forest carbon stocks. Since the 1990, the annual deforestation rate was relatively low, around 0.2%. But there's been a sharp increase in deforestation during the period of 2000 to 2010, with actually some annual deforestation rates which have been recorded from at least 0.3% up to 3.5% in some area. Actually, if you look at this map, where it's hatched in red and black, shows you where the area where they've been this very high deforestation rate. And the main direct cause being slash and burn agriculture, artisanal logging, fuel wood mining and bushfires, but being with the underlying causes being the population growth, different institutional aspects with some political decision and mismanagement and civil unrest, infrastructure and urbanization, and also the economic crisis and unemployment and poverty that has been rampant in DRC. So, in order to address the drivers of deforestation and forest degradation, DRC has set up, has been involved in the REDD+ process since 2009. It was actually the first country in the Congo Basin to get REDD+ financing through the UN REDD program and also the World Bank Forest Carbon Partnership Facility. And in terms of the major advances, so they adopted the National REDD+ Framework Strategy in 2012. And the vision of this strategy is to stabilize the forest cover by 2030 and maintain it at 63.5% of the national territory. And that national development strategy is based on 7 pillars: governance, land tenure, energy, demography, forest, agriculture, and land use planning. Those are all the pillars on which it is based and that they want to address. They also created a national REDD+ fund in DRC. So basically, it is the entry point for funding the country's national REDD+ strategy at the moment. And that national REDD+ strategy has been operationalized in a REDD+ investment plan that is actually going to set the programmatic framework over the next 5 years and identifies the priority policies and measures. The overall budget for the DRC REDD+ investment plan is, they've estimated they needed $1,040 million, And so far, we have 190 million that is financed by CAFI. CAFI being the Central African Forest Initiative. So they agreed to finance part of the REDD+ investment plan, and a letter of intent was signed between the DRC government and that organism, that agency, in April 2016, so quite recently, to establish a cooperative partnership and to address the direct and indirect drivers of the forest loss across different sectors. So you can see that they also, in terms of investment, where they want to focus more to address the drivers: agriculture, wood energy, forestry, mining and oil standards, land use and planning reform, land tenure reform, population, and governance. Now I've just presented you everything that has been going on in terms of the REDD+ process in DRC. Now I want to quickly give you the overview of what have they been doing in terms of the SDG. Because it's a very recent process, every country is expected to actually prioritize out of the 17 SDG and all of the global target, they're expected to prioritize which SDG target they are going to go for at the national level. So DRC was one of the 8 pilot countries that received funding from the UNDP so that they could actually do that work, and they produced a national report. You can see the front page of the report in November 2016, where they have prioritized their targets. And this process was led by the Observatory for Sustainable Development, the Congolese Observatory for Sustainable Development. That is an agency sitting under the Ministry of Planning and Revolution for Modernity. So they picked, of course, the 17 SDG, but for the target, they prioritized 38 SDG targets. So now, before I go into the details, I'll just give you in a nutshell, what were the main findings in terms of how REDD+ in DRC can contribute to the prioritized SDG. So we found out that the REDD+ planned action in DRC can actually contribute can contribute to 15 out of 17 SDG in DRC and to 21 targets out of the 38 prioritized targets for DRC. The 2 SDG where there were lesser contribution were SDG 6 about clean water and sanitation and SDG 14 life below water. Doesn't mean that there wouldn't be any contribution or indirect contribution, but it was not coming out very strongly from what has been planned in DRC so far. And the REDD+ planned action are mostly closely related, as expected, to SDG 13 and SDG 15, but also to the SDG 1, no poverty, quality education, affordable and clean energy, and peace, justice, and strong institution. So going into the details, actually, so for each SDG that was prioritized and actually the SDG target, I didn't show it here to make it a bit more simple. We matched with the key action that were from the REDD+ investment plan, that were planned in the REDD+ DRC investment plan. So to give you an example, for instance, for SDG 1, no poverty, actually all of the programs and the projects that are emerging under the REDD+ strategy and the REDD+ investment plan, the aim is to support people's livelihood and also to transition to a green economy, so with the ultimate goal to alleviate poverty. So poverty rates will be improved through REDD+ investment action plans such as the development of sustainable value chain and support for income generating activities. They are also planning to support access to highly energy efficient and improve low cost cooking stoves, and to support sustainable production of charcoal. And remember, there was a pillar in the REDD+ investment plan about demography or population, and they are planning within this pillar to support a lot of what is about family planning and women's education. Also, for instance, for SDG 4, quality education, they are planning to support the women's education and by providing schooling for girls, literacy education for female adults, and supporting the emergence of leadership skills among women and young indigenous people. I'll not go in details because it will be a bit too long, but I'm just giving you an overview of the key SDG. SDG 7 about affordable and clean energy. The REDD+ investment plan of DRC is planning to increase the use of improved cooking stoves and support for the massive diffusion. Like they want to diffuse it in 10% of the household in Kinshasa and the provincial capital. They are also planning some feasibility studies for the development of fuel substitution. They are supporting the sustainable production of charcoal within the framework of community-based forestry. And they are also planning the implementation of wood energy projects around large urban centers so that you can actually diversify the supply away from the natural forest. So SDG 13 and SDG 15, of course, are the key two SDG where REDD+ can contribute to. So basically, all of the actions, all of the measures that are proposed in the REDD+ investment plan are going to aim at reducing greenhouse gas emission directly or indirectly, and therefore contribute to address climate change. Again, in terms of supporting sustainable production of charcoal, they want to revise the energy policy of the country so that they will include a subcomponent for sustainable management of wood energy and developing alternatives to wood energy. This one is also another action I mentioned before. In terms of SDG 15, so a lot of the action are, of course, focusing on the conservation, restoration, and sustainable use of the forest ecosystems. They are going to adopt and implement REDD+ standards for mining and hydrocarbon investment in forest area. They are going to adopt a new agricultural policy to integrate the REDD+ challenges and land use principles and promote zero deforestation in industrial agricultural supply chain. They are going to also revise the forest code. So as you can see, there is a lot of things going on actually, and even at the moment in the national strategy and sectoral plans, they are actually revising the land tenure policy, the agricultural policy, the forest code, and it's all the REDD+ investment plan who is actually pushing on those actions. This thing is not working anymore. If you can just go to the next slide. Here it goes. Okay. They're also continuing with SDG 15. They're also having some action to stabilize illegal logging by 2020. Again, like I said, they are going to work on a more transparent and participatory land use policy that will organize and optimize the use of land and forest resources, etc. There is so much more. And then I mentioned as well the SDG 16 on peace, justice, and strong institution. And basically, actually, in the REDD+ investment plan, they are planning to have establishment of an independent and operational auditing mechanism that will be linked with the land tenure policy. And so all of these actually new actions are going to also contribute to reduce corruption and also develop effective and accountable and more transparent institutions at all levels. So, like now, if you remember the analytical framework I was talking about, the policy linkages and the enabling environment, after this analysis, we actually highlighted a number of barriers to the REDD+ and SDG linkages, and that were also emphasized during all the interviews and workshops we had with the stakeholders. The first barrier being that, for instance, during that exercise of for the country to prioritize the SDG and contextualize at the level, none of the key stakeholders that were historically involved in the REDD+ process were actually included. So that's kind of an issue if you want to actually have those linkages between those two processes. And I draw this this stakeholder map. It's much more complex, but just to give you an idea, for instance, you have the Ministry of Environment and Sustainable Development. The Department of Sustainable Development sits within that ministry and is in charge of REDD+ and the CN REDD+ coordination for REDD+ is there as well. You have the ministry of the other side, you have the Ministry of Planning and Revolution for Modernity, and under them sits the Congolese Observatory for Sustainable Development. The one that I was explaining was in charge of the SDG priorities. Oh, I hate this word. Prioritization exercise. So basically, there've been already some concerns, like some tension, because this department was feeling like they should have been in charge of doing that exercise of the SDG, but they were the one to be assigned the task. And then you also have, I mentioned the National REDD+ Fund, which sits under the Ministry of Finance. Now, this one, Department of Study and Planning, there are some departments that sit in every ministry, but they depend on the Ministry of Planning and Revolution for Modernity. So, I mean, that's a good thing because it's already like a commendable effort to have some cross-sectoral coordination, because you have this department who sit in the Ministry of Environment, who sit in the Ministry of Agriculture, etc., etc. However, when they run that exercise for the SDG, basically the only stakeholders that were involved were the stakeholders who belong to those departments. And because there is no communication, for instance, in the same ministry between this department and this department who is actually in charge of REDD+, at the end there is a lot of lack of communication and coordination. So that was one of the major issues that was discussed as well at the workshop, especially because in the workshop we managed to get people from these different departments, and I think that was like one of the first time they got together in a meeting room for a long time, if not the first time. Then we also emphasize that there were no specific formal mechanism to support interministerial or interagency collaboration, coordination between the REDD+ and the SDG process. So far, they've been treated as separate issues without synergy. And also that there is a lack of a national sustainable development strategy in DRC at the moment, which is also a significant challenge. There is no common MRV information, technology, tools, or synergy or coordination of budget and organizational resources so far between REDD+ and SDG. Another issue is the top-down approaches across governance level. So far, the default pattern is top-down decision-making and the use of national venues for government meetings and stakeholder representation, and basically the role of the subnational level actors is only to validate the plans that are made in Kinshasa. And for instance, this SDG exercise was run at the national level, and then they've done a pilot exercise in 4 provinces to also, because you are also supposed to prioritize the SDG at the subnational level. And they found out that basically what was done at the national level did not necessarily fit fully with the local concerns, the specificities, and the objectives. So if the local government are not involved in this REDD+ and SDG processes in an inclusive manner, of course the operational linkages between the 2 processes are not going to happen, or even they will be counterproductive. And finally, political instability has been also a big issue. There have been a lot of change of government, a lot of change of ministries, and therefore plans start to be developed and that get dropped, and a lot of insecurity in some area of the country. So this has been an hindrance on all programs, and including REDD+ and SDG. Coming to the key policy recommendation, so there should be, of course, we should initiate cross-sectoral coordination between REDD+ and SDG at the highest level of political leadership, such as parliament or prime ministry, so that actually it gives the potential to transform DRC capacity to achieve interrelated goals and targets and reduce the redundancies in planning and implementation. Actually, from the discussion going on, everything that is related to sustainable development and SDG in DRC is very likely to be embedded at the highest level, such as the Parliament Oversight Committees. So it could also be a good opportunity for REDD+ to also gain higher political leadership in DRC, because so far REDD+ has been mostly owned by the Ministry of Environment, but not so much by the other ministries such as agriculture, etc., and even at the highest level. And like I showed you before, the technical division work, for instance, the Department of Sustainable Development sitting at the Ministry of Environment, and the Congolese Observatory for Sustainable Development sitting at the other Ministry of Planning and Revolution for Modernity, need to somehow, be linked in an explicit way. They also have some institutional focal points for both processes, and they should also collaborate and jointly coordinate efforts. There is need for better multi-stakeholder processes for involving all of the actors. Actually, the REDD+ process in DRC was not bad in that matter. The participation was really good enough. But in terms of the SDG process, and also I've not discussed, but because in the study we went much broader, looking also at the NDC, National Determined Contribution, and other national strategy development, looking at national plans, sectoral plans, etc. And in all of these other processes, the the participatory process has not been very strong. And those SDG targets that they prioritized in 2016, they have to be prioritized every 5 years. So they will have to redo that same work in 2021. So that could also be a good opportunity, to improve upon the less participatory process that occurred last time. They need to develop, definitely, resources should be mobilized and directed to the development of a sustainable development strategy, so that it offers the country a clear and common vision. They also, stakeholders in DRC also wants to set up some commission on sustainable development, with some sustainable development unit in each sectoral ministries that would support the better coordination between the SDG themselves and between REDD+ and SDG. But this would raise the question or redundancy with, or at least reorganization and discussion with those departments of study and planning I was mentioning that already exist and already sit at each ministry. It would be important to initiate efforts to attract joint funding that could simultaneously benefit REDD+ action and SDG, especially with SDG 13 and SDG 15. and explore where the REDD+ and SDG monitoring and evaluation can complement each other. Because the mission as well of this Congolese Observatory for Sustainable Development is they have to conduct an annual evaluation of the SDG achievement. At the same time, this REDD+ program that is funded by CAFI, they also have a very measurable milestone to be reached by 2020 with different indicators. So there is definitely there is an opportunity here for information sharing between the two institutions to improve the monitoring and evaluation mechanism and reduce costs. Promote effective decentralization of REDD+ and SDG implementation at provincial level. That's the only way, because things happen at the local level. So it's the only way if you want actually those processes to succeed, to somehow be able to have the local government structure to lead the local level processes, and to have national ministries only in a coordinating and supporting role. But better involvement of the provinces will require engagement by the highest political authorities of the provincial level in each of these processes, that they also have some enhanced financial and technical resources and capacity development for the subnational decision makers and technical experts. As well, at the provincial level, they have some REDD+ provincial focal points, and within the SDG process, they plan to have some SDG focal points allocated in each province. So some coordination should happen between those focal points as well at the provincial level. That is also a recommendation, is that we found out that there was a critical importance of knowledge sharing. For instance, that report that was produced by the Congolese Observatory on the SDG exercise, nobody knew about it. Like when I organized the workshop, none of the stakeholders heard about that report, heard about that document. So there is clearly a huge gap between the different institutions, and they've been discussion and suggestion of some online platform that would be enabling to share and interact for information related to all of these processes. And finally, like I said, SDG 17 is very important to strengthen the synergies across the SDG themselves. Actually, within SDG 17, it's like I said, it's about supporting the means for implementation for the other SDG. And within SDG 17, you have categories like finance, technology, capacity building, policy coherence, partnership, data, monitoring, accountability. So all of this, of course, is needed to implement in a proper way the other SDG. And so far, there's been no really national strategy for addressing that. So that's about it, I guess. And well, this is just to show you, we've done, after going beyond the case study of DRC, we've done a cross comparison between DRC, Indonesia, and Peru. And we also came up with a list of questions that is going to help to understand the strengths, opportunities, and gaps in integrating REDD+ and SDG, so that to increase coherence, synergy, and accelerated impact. And this is actually for the policy makers to support them in doing that. Thank you.
Thank you, Florence. Questions? Yes, please.
My name is James Sonsando. I'm an independent consultant, mainly in agriculture, but in sustainability as well. I wanted to understand, at what level did you engage the government? That's number one. Number two, if this is decentralized to provinces, then how does the funding work, and who controls this funding?
Thank you. Let me take another question. Yes, please.
Thanks very much, Florence. In my previous life, we helped to set up some of the REDD stuff there. So there's two questions I have, and they're basically more requiring you to speculate than really speak on the study. One is, my hypothesis is that if the challenges in DRC weren't so great, the deforestation rate would be even much higher. Okay, so there's a question about risk, sovereign risk, value chains, and investment in rapid deforestation that has a connection to what we enable within a REDD SDG framework. So that's the first part. It's a little complex. Yeah. The second part is essentially my understanding even today is that outside Kinshasa, the central government basically has very little influence. Yeah, as you point out, the provincial government. So if we are looking at sustainable development and sustainable forest development, what are the avenues we might use? And here I'm thinking about the private sector, which didn't figure over here. So if you can connect private sector, value chains, deforestation, REDD and SDG, you get a prize from me.
I was planning on taking 3 questions, but I think they were complex enough for Florence to answer them directly.
Okay, coming back to your first question, at what level we engage the government? So that was in the study we actually went to interview the relevant person in charge at the Ministry of Environment, at the Ministry of Revolution and Planning, and at the Ministry of Finance, so that we also get a full overview. And then people as well were involved from the Ministry of Agriculture. So we try so that we hear, from the different stakeholders. But I mean, that was, we are not the one who conducted any of the, the exercise to prioritize SDGs. So during that study, it was mostly about interviewing them, and then we involved them as well in the workshop. And I actually presented those same results to them, so that they could actually discuss it and tell me if there were disagreement or if there were any misunderstandings. So they were actually pretty much validating the result and the key issues that we found. Who controls funding? Yeah, the central state, definitely. And they were supposed to be some reversal of giving back 40% of some of the budget of forest at the provincial level, but it's never happened yet. So it's on the principle in the document, in the strategies, but so far it has not happened. So this is also, I guess, what is also blocking the provincial level. Yeah. And now that's a tricky one from Ravi, of course. I think at the provincial level, first of all, like in terms of the actors as well, because indeed there is not much, well, like I said, the central state could also support much more in terms of financially aspects to the provincial level. But if we are talking only about the stakeholders, I think, and from the discussion we had with all the stakeholders, also supporting the capacity of the university at provincial level and having some more linkages with the scientific aspect there. Also, the donor, for instance, the donor funding is always only focusing on Kinshasa. Everything is happening in Kinshasa. And when I was talking about decentralization, it should also be somehow decentralization from the donor sphere funding and coordination. They should also move out of Kinshasa and actually also focus more at the provincial level. They do, but they're always based, everything is centralized in Kinshasa. So you don't have much of any offices, much of any actually supportive infrastructure that is going to be based in the provincial level. People are just going to come and visit 2 weeks and that's it. So that is not how I think it will help to support and to have the provincial level taking off. And in terms of the private sector, yeah, that's something as well that during the study we discovered that they are still very weakly involved in all of this process. It has started with the REDD+ process, but it's not strong enough at all. So that should be also some aspect where, because if we want to make the links with you were talking about the value chain, and so they are the key actors as well to involve. So that would be an angle as well. Yeah, that's what I can think about just right now.
Okay, more questions? One, and I will also ask one. Go ahead, please.
It's not a question, it's a continuation of the question I raised. In African governments, if you have to influence policy, you cannot do it with technical people alone, because they do not influence policies. That's why I wanted to understand at what level you engaged. You need to identify champions at senior enough level if you really have to make anything change or happen.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, this study was more about giving what's the state of the art at the moment and giving like the picture, you know, at that time. But if there would be some continuation, know that we know what are the issues. Definitely, like I was saying, like it needs to be embedded at the highest level. That's what we prime minister or parliament, so that it's gonna actually have a stronger influence. Yeah. But that would be a different work or for later. Yeah. Also, there is something I just wanted to add as well, is that, for instance, that's more related to what we were also discussing with Ravi and in general, but for instance, in the REDD+ process, they had a very good, they've been quite strong on this REDD+ process, and they had REDD+ focal points in every province. Because I didn't have time to give you all of the details, but for instance, the coordination of REDD+ at the moment in DRC is almost non-existent. It is dormant for like 2 years or something, because they didn't have new funding. And now you have this National REDD+ Fund, which is under the Ministry of Finance, and somehow, but it's not like, it's under the Ministry of Finance, but it's like run by UNDP. And the CNRED is the one that is run nationally by the government. And this one has been dormant, and it shouldn't happen in such a country where REDD+ is so strong. So that's also a big issue. And another big issue is that they had, during this whole REDD readiness investment, they invested a lot in the local expertise. You have some really technical experts which were based in the province who have a lot of expertise and knowledge and could share some of the critical lessons that they've learned over all of these years. But none of them has been actually involved in the next phase, which was the REDD+ investment plan and what is now happening. And they just, some of them have still been recruited by some local NGO who need them on the ground, but most of them are just, you know, disappearing and trying to. So this is also a lack of capitalization on what you already have, all this local knowledge you have, that I also think is something to address.
I'd like to add one question. As you know, my PhD study is on the Mau forest, right? And on why it is so difficult to save the Mau forest. there are many different dynamics that contribute to that, obviously, but one of the big underlying things that I noticed that people never know is that the Mau forest is not only a natural forest, but it's also the site of forest plantations. So sometimes when we speak about the Congo, I notice that I know very little about what kind of forest we're actually talking about. Given the fact that this is a very important tropical forest, I think most people think that we are dealing only with a natural forest where there is no major commercial production and extraction. Is that true? Or do we have like major forest plantations for which the implications in terms of sustainable management and the implications in terms of vested interests are very different? And there's a lot of interaction between management of natural forests and sustainable management of forest plantations, which both contribute to
I think
to forest cover and to afforestation, etc., etc. But the implications are so different, and sometimes I feel that there's very little discussion about this.
Yeah, no, it's true. It's a good point. But I think in the case of DRC, we are talking mostly about like natural forests. Also, there is some area for plantation and commercial, but all these analyses were more about the natural forest. So I don't have much in terms of...
So also related to Ravi's question, there's no like larger scale commercial exploitation of those forests, to your knowledge?
There is, yes, there is, but I'm not sure, honestly, Lisa. Like like to give you like a real the magnitude of that is happening, but I'm not sure about the magnitude actually. Maybe Ravi seems like he wants to add in.
Well, there's somebody behind us. There's a lot of mining going on, both artisanal as well as private sector. There's timber exploitation, and there were plans to put in oil palm and other plantations as well. I'm not sure how far they've progressed. So this is why I say, you know, the fact that it is a weak government or weak governance, on the one hand enables deforestation, but it's smallholder deforestation, but prevents large-scale deforestation. And the question is, if you have what are the policy actions you would take in this context to help DRC to move towards sustainable forest management and sustainable development at the same time.
Any more questions? Any additions? Okay, thank you very much. Thank you all for coming. Thank you, Florence, for the very interesting presentation.
Thank you.